Welcome to Magenta Cinema. My name is Jen, and today I'm dying to get into the Halloween spirit. So I'm gonna be watching and reviewing some random horror movies from the YouTube free movie page. Taking a look at the options on the free movie page under horror, there was only 16 options, so I went ahead and I used a random number generator to pick out 2 movies to review today. So, coming in at the first one was number 6. We have Quarantine 2 Terminal. I've never seen the first one for this, nor do I think I've heard of it, but I'm excited to give this one a try. And the second choice we have was number 14, which is Flight 7500. Both of these movies are new to me, so I'm excited to give them a shot today. Okay, so I am back from my movie marathon. And interestingly enough, both of these movies are flight-related horror movies, which I don't think I've seen one of those in a minute. When I think about flight horror, I think of either Final Destination, which only takes place in the beginning on a plane really, or I think of Red Eye, which is not necessarily a horror film, but Cillian Murphy's performance in that is enough to give me the chills to this day. Let's just say that scene with the pen.
That it would never happen again.
Yeah, that stuck with me. So I'm definitely excited to see how these movies are gonna take on this subject because I feel like there's only so much you can really do when we're talking about the suspense and horror on a plane. So please buckle your seatbelts, get ready for the turbulence ahead, and note the emergency exits around you, but please just get ready for this bumpy ride. So let's start with my first pick, which is Quarantine 2 Terminal. And now a warning, this one did say that it was edited for TV, so there may be scenes that I have not seen in their entirety, but I did want to stick to watching this YouTube version for this. But the main edit that I saw in this is that they just bleeped all the cuss words, which is interesting because I'm pretty sure this movie is still rated R. Just a disclaimer that there could be stuff that I missed from this movie, but I don't really think we're going to be missing a whole lot of context. Quarantine 2 Terminal, it definitely references the first Quarantine film and takes place directly after the events of the film, but you get enough information that you don't really need to have watched the first one to understand any of what's going on. It works fine as a standalone film. It begins with 2 flight attendants getting ready for their next job, and their names are Jenny and Paula. As we see them and we see the passengers start to board the plane, we get the beginning of many shaky handheld shots that are going to be throughout this film. I do like these handheld shots, especially in the beginning as we're sort of meeting all the passengers, because it feels like a third person's point of view actually watching and getting on the plane. It definitely adds to the ominous vibe of the whole thing. Sometimes though, these shaky cam shots definitely get a bit jarring in where they're placed, and you'll see that a bit later in the movie. So as we see everyone board the plane, you start to see all these concerning things going on. They keep panning back to the pilot sneezing. I just have to say too, like, those were some of the shots that were so jarring because they're so up close in the pilot's face. But you also see some other stuff like a man who's transporting hamsters, I guess, and someone getting bit literally right at the beginning of the film. You already see exactly how this is gonna unravel.
So what's in there?
Hamsters.
Oh.
If anything happens to them, my class will eat me alive.
Oh.
We hear that they're also on a red-eye flight, but that seems to always be the case for these horror flight movies. They always have to be overnight for that extra level of spookiness, I guess. We get to meet some of the passengers, like George, the preteen who feels too mature to have to be supervised on the plane, as well as some of the unlikable characters that you just hope are gonna die off by the end of the movie.
I'm going to be your daddy.
This one guy comes in to the rescue and keeps flirting with our main flight attendant, Jenny, but I know that he's supposed to give off like nice guy vibes in the beginning. I found him immediately creepy. Like, there's just something about it I don't know if the actor was trying to give that level of creepiness underlying, but from the very get-go, I just had a feeling this guy was not right. Followed by some more handheld shots to let you know that there's supposed to be some tension going on here. Finally, we hear news about some sort of outbreak happening in LA, which was what happened in the first quarantine film. And of course, not long after that, the first infected person reveals themselves. So of course, we see this large golfer man just throwing up all over the place, just immediately just causing chaos on the plane. And at some point, he freaks out and runs, literally tackles the flight attendant, Jenny. Like, she gets bodied out of nowhere. George also tries to show his maturity by trying to save Jenny in this moment. She also after then asks him if he's feeling nauseous, making us worried that he's infected as well. But I just have to say, like I'm nauseous watching this, especially because of all those shots in the cockpit that keep happening. They're able to emergency land the plane and they take over a terminal that they were not cleared for. And this is where we meet one of the main characters, Ed, who was just so unlucky that he got caught in this right as his shift was ending and he was about to leave. He helps them all off the plane where they are eventually quarantined in a small part of the airport. This is where we start to understand the gravity of the situation. Some of them decide to try and go back to the plane to get some supplies, including a first aid kit to help the other flight attendant, Paula, who was really badly attacked by the zombie. I'm sorry, but there was no way that she was making out of this thing. He fully bit her face off like a bath salt moment. However, when they do go back on the plane, this is where I saw some of my favorite shots of the film. I was actually really impressed with some of the shots that they had in this scene. I just found that it actually worked really well with the tension and not knowing what was going to happen next. I especially loved the framing of some of these shots. But then, of course, they have to ruin that vibe with some unnecessary edits throughout this thing, I guess, to try and add some horror element to it. I found this one shot in the hallway like pretty funny, even though I think it was supposed to be scary. We also get some phenomenal line delivery by some of this cast, by the way. Some top tier acting, including this. Once they've been quarantined, Jenny finally steps up as the leader and is able to pull out of the shock that she's kind of been in since she got rocked in the cabin earlier. We get maybe one of the only moments of character development in this whole film here, where Jenny has this moment with George confessing about how tough her father was on her in the past, and had this moment of pushing her when she was getting her pilot's license, where he just completely let go and let her handle it.
I went into spin. I had to take control.
It feels like it is supposed to show her character arc of getting past this shock and being able to finally step up to where she needs to be. But hearing this story, kind of just traumatizing, to be honest. You would understand why she would feel the way she was and why she would freeze up in these moments. I just have to take a moment to acknowledge that currently there are flight attendants across the country that have been going on strike because of the fact that they are not being paid for all the hours that they are working, depending on what airline they're at. That the time that they spend waiting, being at the airport, all of that is not being counted towards their paycheck. On top of that, the super high amount of training that these flight attendants are supposed to have every year, and the calm under pressure that they are expected to have in emergency situations, such as this fantasy zombie outbreak, right? Like, she is expected to step up and be the leader, since she is saying, I'm still your flight attendant, you guys haven't landed, the pilot's gone, and you guys have to listen to me. Like, how realistically would she step up for all these people when she's getting paid basically minimum wage? Alright, so back to Jenny. She's finally stepped up to being the leader of this group, However, George is still somehow the smartest person here, even though he's a kid, because he has been suspicious of the creepy guy just as long as I have, and goes to actually investigate him and see what's up. The kid actually calls the creepy guy out, who claims that he's a teacher and that's why he was bringing a bunch of hamsters on a plane. But George points out that he saw rats and not hamsters, and believes that creepy guy, who is what his name is now, is really the point of this outbreak. Of course, we have to have another, I guess, like jump scare moment. I don't really know, but the golfer guy once again comes out, charges right at Jenny. Like, I don't really know why he seems to be targeting her like he is, but it seems like that whole moment was just to kind of break up the accusations that were happening, because it very quickly is all pointing towards creepy guy right now. The CDC comes in to make sure if any of them are infected, and of course shit hits the fan. And all of this goes down in a matter of 3 minutes. They enter, they try to start testing people, they start freaking out, and all of a sudden the cat bites the owner, a rat bites a guy, and then just all hell breaks loose. The group that escapes, along with one of the CDC guys, he explains that they're actually from Homeland Security and they were in there trying to test different versions of a cure, and just basically called them lab rats.
If what I've seen in here spreads out into the general population and we have no clue how to deal with it.
So he stays alive just long enough for him to give an exposition dump, and then he promptly kills himself. And near the end here, we do get, I guess, like the most exciting death of the movie so far. So they use a lift to crush a zombie before it gets the only guy who knows how to do anything in this movie, Ed. Then Jenny's friend Paula obviously had turned to a zombie, and Jenny takes it upon herself to beat the shit out of Paula, I guess, to show her strength and show her growth as a leader, that she is able to stick up for herself in this moment, but she really just beats the shit out of her. George is continuing to do his detective work on the creepy guy, and it very quickly gets known that he is the one who started this. They are all looking for a hidden tunnel that is supposed to be in the terminal still so that they can try to escape. And meanwhile, creepy guy is forced to confess about what actually happened and basically beg for the cure because he is now infected. Now that we're at this point, Ed gets shot, and sadly he was like my favorite character, but of course he also does not make it to the end. And while this happens, creepy guy explains all the plot holes away. He reveals that it's been his plan all along to release this virus, and that the world could use a good plague, I guess. But the most psychopathic thing of this whole thing is before he says that, he taps his eye, because he's gonna put a shot in it. He taps his eye like he's just tapping his arm like, yeah, let's go, right? He freaking hits his eyeball, and then he goes to put the thing in his eye, and he shoots it in his inner eyelid. So why was he hitting his eyeball? He didn't, I don't know. That whole thing was psychotic. So as they're trying to escape, the medic woman that has been very vital throughout this whole thing, she of course also gets bit, and she gives Jenny, the main character, these thermal vision goggles. I don't really get how they decided to show these goggles, because they do it in like black and white when I'm used to like thermal vision being various colors. Jenny and George finish the creepy guy off, whose name I guess is Henry, I think. But they finish the creepy guy off finally, and they escape through the baggage vent. But of course Jenny is clearly bitten. She couldn't get away scot-free. So as they continue on, she just has to keep pushing George forward as she's changing. And I think this was supposed to be like a heart-tugging moment, and it's definitely sad. But it's just hard when George has been so objective, I guess, and very smart throughout this movie, but now towards the end he's just getting pretty scared and not wanting to admit that Jenny is transforming. He has to leave Jenny behind as she's transforming, and once he gets out, he just seems so apathetic. Like, I don't really know what kind of emotion they were going for here, but he somehow doesn't seem very fazed, even though a few minutes ago he was really freaking out about having to be on his own. He makes it out of the airport, but you would assume there's still a quarantine going on in the area, so I don't know how he's expected to get out of here now on his own. So, I don't know. A little bit vague of an ending. I didn't mind that he was the only survivor, but I just felt like the ending was so fast. So, it left me a little unsatisfied. So, overall, I would rate this one a 3 out of 10. I feel like there was a good amount of tension there, but it was mostly in the beginning. And once they leave the airplane, actually, it starts to get a bit boring from there for me. It's a bit predictable, and the zombies are not really anything special from what I've seen. I feel like you don't have a really great character to root for except for George, and then obviously Jenny, but it takes her a while to kind of step into that role. But I think that was the main criticism, is that I just didn't really know these people too well, so it's kind of hard to root for any of them. They just made it very clear who not to root for. Once they were in the quarantine bit, it just didn't feel like there was any actual way out from their situation. I don't mind them keeping some things to the imagination, but I do think if maybe we had gotten a little more information of the state of the world, how widespread it had gotten from LA, maybe it could have raised the stakes that you would think that these are some of the only survivors out there and you would root for them more. But I feel like instead, their fate felt a little more doomed from the beginning. So now on to the second pick of the day, Flight 7500. So this movie starts with a crazy preview of chaos before flashing 4 hours earlier, and it also starts similar to the last one with the relationship between two of the flight attendants that are about to be on board. I find this flash forward kind of interesting because by the end of it, I don't really remember having a flash forward. I don't really think it was necessary to add tension, because I think that when you're going into a horror movie, or at least a thriller kind of movie on a plane, I think you already know that there's going to be a lot of tension built up and everything. We meet one of the main characters, this man from one of the couples, who I really thought was Liam Hemsworth when I was first looking at this movie without my glasses. He kind of also just looked like both Hemsworth brothers were phasing in and out of each other really fast. That's just who he is from now on. I think I'm gonna call him Hemsworth. Once again, the flight starts in LA, but the destination is now Tokyo. So we get these ominous shots of spiky necklaces and shoes. You start to see some of the other characters, including this sort of goth girl that, like, she has the most minimal amount of dark kind of stuff to her style, and she is like the scariest goth person to the couple she's next to, because the woman is a complete germaphobe and also just really sucks.
Excuse me. Hi. There are some empty single seats behind us here. Maybe when we're in the air you could move so that we could all have a bit of room.
We also see creepy guy with the bolero tie. I'm just gonna call him Bolero Tie because most of the characters here, I don't recall you ever learning their names. This movie, I feel like overall did a better job with like keeping the tension throughout the film. However, I felt like I learned even less about some of these characters by the end of the movie than I did with the previous movie. So we also learned that the Hemsworth guy and his girlfriend are pretending to still be together for a 3-week-long vacation, but they had previously already broken up. But that's just kind of crazy for me. So we get some more creepy dialogue from Bolero Tie as he's saying on the phone to tear the eyeballs out.
Tell you I want blue eyes. Just gouge the eyeballs out. Just tear them out. I gotta go.
And then we also see the douchey bro rip out this girl's earbuds to try and talk to her. Also right after being a complete racist asshole.
So I'm backpacking through Asia. It's gonna be awesome. I'm gonna catch some waves in
Excuse
Bali.
me. All electronic devices must be...
No problem.
So you're already rooting for half the characters on this plane to die. After some turbulence, Bolero Tai has a medical emergency. I don't know if he's having a heart attack, but he just all of a sudden can't breathe. And he starts bleeding and just freaking out. He starts coughing up blood, and Hemsworth bro, who is of course a paramedic, comes to try and help him out, but he very quickly convulses and dies on the plane.
He's gone.
This scene I felt was a lot more effective than the last one because with the zombie transformation, it wasn't because it was a zombie transformation, but it's because of how quickly everything kind of ramped up. It almost became kind of comical to me. But with this one, you already have this really creepy vibe from this character and you kind of don't expect him to go out so soon. But the way that he goes out is so ominous. You still really have no clue what's going on. The economy class gets evacuated and they bring his body up to the economy class since they can't really emergency land at the moment. And this is really just like, that was the most real and creepy part, is imagining having to be on a plane like with a dead body because there's nowhere to go and there's nowhere to land. So this is where we do get to learn a little bit more about some of these characters. I just wish we got more. But we see that the girl that's sat next to the douchey guy, she goes to the bathroom and attempts to take a pregnancy test. But as she is in the bathroom, we see the air pressure of the cabin drop dramatically. And we see this with a couple water bottles just getting crushed instantly. The oxygen masks come down and the whole plane gets smoky. So it's really terrifying. After the whole ordeal, the girl who was taking the pregnancy test was still in the bathroom and they had to come rescue her and gave her oxygen just in time.
Oh my God.
It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. You okay? Oh. You're okay.
But when they found her, her lips were straight blue. So was already feeling like kind of a stretch. Now, 40 minutes in, we're starting to get a little bit more about some of these characters, including the couple with the Hemsworth bro, where they're talking about how they had suffered through multiple miscarriages, and the tension and stress from that is really what kind of tore them apart.
We could have tried again. I was just helpless.
Right after this, we get what I think is the dumbest jump scare of the whole thing, where we see the Bolero Tai guy through the TV screen. However, that does happen to me literally anytime I'm watching something on my laptop and it goes black for a second and I see my own face staring back at me. Then we see that dumb douchey guy trying to steal the watch off of the dripping wet corpse, and he films himself doing so. There we hear an extreme crack open of one of the overhead bins, and all of a sudden the body is gone. So the girl goes back to the bathroom trying to redo that pregnancy test, and we also get the couple talking about not wasting their time and trying to make the most out of their lives. When we go back to the pregnancy test, we see a shot that shows nothing, but she says, "Oh, thank God."
Thank God.
I did kind of think this was a mistake when I first watched it, but as you'll see later, it makes sense once we see the ending. Right after she says, "Oh, thank God," she gets the haunting vision of the man coming out from the floor. This is when the two couples, the kind of annoying couple and the Hemsworth couple, start investigating together and trying to figure out what happened with Bolero Tai's death. It's just weird that it takes almost a full hour into the movie before these people are actually like teaming up in a meaningful way. Felt a little late, to be honest, but they investigate his luggage and his briefcase, and this is where we find out that he had a haunted doll in the briefcase that moves on its own. This is a Shinigami. Shinigami has definitely been portrayed in different ways from Japanese culture. However, the way that they are explaining it specifically in the movie is that it is a death spirit that comes along and has to wait for the person to be able to accept their death before the spirit is able to bring them into the afterlife. Right around here, we also get one of my favorite actual shots of the whole film. You see the goth girl trying to sleep, and as she tries and fluffs her blanket on one of the fluffs, you see the flash of the bolero tie guy coming at you. I thought that was like one of the scariest shots of the film. This is where things really start going off the rails, and you can kind of start to connect the dots a bit once we learn about the Shinigami. So one flight attendant is attacked from the suitcase of the bolero tie guy, and the flight attendant gets sucked into the overhead bin like this is Looney Tunes. Right after that, the goth girl is by herself, and we see her speaking about death from earlier, as we see a spirit version of her as well. And she hugs this spirit version of her. We see the reveal of the girl taking her pregnancy test in the bathroom. We see that she's dead in the bathroom again. Her body was in the same exact position that she was in when she was found earlier and got revived with the oxygen. Now, I was like, did they just use the same shot? Like, did they not have the coverage and they had to use the same shot? But no, that was also very intentional. I think things are really starting to ramp up here, but there was a shot that really took me out of it a bit because it was just so jarring to go from the shaky cam turning off suddenly, and then they also just weren't talking at all for like a minute, so it felt like, what was the point of that moment, and what really is the plan for these couples, because they're kind of just walking around aimlessly and things just keep happening to them. After finding the girl in the bathroom and they go back to the cabin, they finally see the truth. They walk through the cabin and see everybody's dead body in the cabin.
When you're ripped from your life too quickly, you have to let go of whatever is keeping you here.
They also see their own dead bodies sitting there in their seats. They finally realize that they are all dead and needed to move on. And with the oxygen masks being down, you can very easily realize that when the turbulence hit and the pressure in the cabin got completely unstable, that they actually did not make it through that. If you're still confused at this point, they have the TV come on the news to tell you that this flight is flying aimlessly on autopilot now, that they have even tried to go up in the air to check, and that they didn't see any passengers alive on the plane. So I honestly thought that was one of the most tragic parts of it, is seeing the world react to them, watching it through this veil that they know that they cannot get through, and knowing that the outside world already has to accept all of their deaths, even though some of these people were still processing their own death. They had to give us this TV explanation as well as flashback to the entire moment with the oxygen masks just to really hammer it home.
In a depressurized environment, the lack of oxygen would be fatal.
But I have to be honest, if that's the case, I don't really understand then what the first supernatural death was about. I have my theory, but this guy, the bolero tie guy, he was already pretty creepy from the start. They had him make these very ominous phone calls, and why did he have the death doll on him in the first place? It basically ends with the main couple telling each other, like, don't let go, and I guess finally getting past their differences that they had to realize that they just wanted to love each other.
Let me go.
And overall, to me, the message of the film seemed to be about commitment and happiness and family. All of the conflicts that you've seen between people are mainly commitments with each other and how it affects their happiness. We see one of the flight attendants rethinking her engagement because she's not as happy as she thought she would be, and one of the flight attendants deciding to end the affair that she was a part of. So overall, each one of these characters basically got to have their moment of final closure and a final decision in their own life before they finally accepted their death. I think it's supposed to be about following your heart, living without regrets, and they only can accept their death when they have gone through this closure. So all of them basically get closure except for the newlywed woman who was very germophobic, very rude the whole movie. It seems to end with everyone else seemingly accepting their fate, but her still being very confused about the whole thing. She's on the plane now alone, and we get a final shot of her opening one of the trash bins and something popping out at her. I rate this one a 4 out of 10. I definitely think it was better than the last movie, especially that they were able to keep the tension the whole time and the mystery of the whole thing. However, I found that the characters weren't very strong or compelling to me to watch, and they barely worked together towards the end. And the events seem very random until the plot twist ending, which I do think they did a pretty good job of, but there was some parts that didn't really keep my attention because I didn't really understand where we were going with it. The whole plot twist is supposed to explain it all away, but it definitely leaves some questions for the audience about the first death and what exactly was going on with Bolero Tie Guy and the Shinigami doll he had in his luggage. My theory is that the man himself was the Shinigami on the plane, that he, in a Final Destination-esque kind of way, already knew that this plane was going down and that he needed to be on the plane to be able to help these people accept their death and move on. This makes sense because he disappears only because his body was no longer needed and he had disappeared and kind of just keeps being seen throughout the film as the omen of death for these people. However, I don't think we get closure with every single person that seems to be taken. For instance, I think of the douchey guy who was stealing his watch. I didn't see any sort of character development or any remorse for how he's lived his life. It seemed more of a moment where I guess you're supposed to sort of be happy that he gets taken in this mysterious kind of way, but his death was the most mysterious to me because everyone else either moved on or gets left at the very end, like the other woman. But I do know that a main point of that was that they couldn't really show all of their cards too quickly because then the plot twist would probably be pretty easy to see ahead of time. Overall though, I do think that is a very good concept and I liked where the story went eventually. It's just that I think if we had some more compelling characters to root for or root against, that probably could have kept me more compelled throughout the watch. It was a fun watch, and for a flight movie, I did really love the take they went with this. They kept me definitely guessing if this was gonna be just a straight horror or if it was gonna have a supernatural element to it. Alright, that is gonna be all for today. Thank you so much for watching. If you made it this far, please consider giving the video a like or subscribing. I love doing movie and show reviews here, so it's always a great time. Thank you again so much, and please have a safe rest of your journey. Bye-bye now. Bye-bye. Bye-bye now. Thank you. Have a great day. Bye-bye. Trash. Thank you. Trash. Trash. Sir, can you please put up your tray? We're preparing for landing. Okay, don't pay me enough for this.